Well, Daniel Dennett, who's one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, said back in 2003 that those who hold to a purely naturalist atheist view should call themselves the brights, thereby distinguishing themselves clearly from the poor, dim, benighted souls that hold to a supernaturalist view of the world. So the smart people are just, claim this title. We're the bright people. Now, in support of this thesis, lots of atheists bring forward all the time. I see it on the web all the time. These statistics about scientists, who I guess are the smartest people in our society, and it's some very small percentage, believe in God. It's like 7% of scientists believe in God. So we've been hearing that for a long time. Just recently, there appeared in the online journal Salon this article by John Masterly, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Seattle. And he's adding to this by saying not only does a small percentage of scientists believe in God, but a very small percentage of professional academic philosophers believe in God. I think it was 14%. So he's saying, now I know that just bringing forth statistics, doesn't say much about the veracity of an argument. Nevertheless, Masterly, solemnly warns, it should give pause to religious people that all these smart folks, don't believe in God. Well, I would say, Professor Masterly, consider me unpaused. I've written a lot about the scientific side of this thing, so I'll just say a few simple things about it. Scientists, in my experience, reading all these critiques, scientists rarely know what serious people mean when they use the word God. Almost invariably, when I read these scientific critiques, they assume that God is some item in the universe, some big being who may or may not exist, and let's look and find out. Let's try to see if there's any evidence, meaning physical traces of this being. Is there experimental evidence, etc.? See, but this is precisely what religious people do not mean by God, serious religious people. If that's what you mean by God, some item in the universe, some gap in an ordinary causal nexus, well then I am an atheist, and so was Thomas Aquinas. What serious people believe about God is not that he's an item in the universe that could be discovered through scientific investigation. Rather, God is that non-contingent ground of contingent existence, the condition for the possibility of the existence of the universe as such, which means the sciences, even in principle, cannot adjudicate the question of God. That's why, see, when scientists come forward and say, oh, I don't believe in God because I have no scientific evidence for God, my answer, honestly, is who cares? It makes not the slightest difference to adjudicating the question of whether God, the true God, exists. Okay, so 7% of scientists don't believe in God. Who cares is my honest answer to that. Now, what about Masterly's suggestion that, but 86% of philosophers, professional philosophers, don't believe in God? Presumably, they know what serious religious people mean when they use the word God. Well, here's my first observation. Not necessarily. There are a lot of different areas of philosophy. The philosophy of religion is a particular branch of philosophy, and a lot of professional philosophers don't know much about it, have not looked seriously into that corner. In fact, I discovered something through one of my researchers that behind this poll of philosophers, that only 5% of the philosophers interrogated specialized in the philosophy of religion. The vast majority of the philosophers that were surveyed don't specialize in these areas. So they don't really have any particular expertise in adjudicating these complex questions of the nature and existence of God. Turn this thing around, by the way. If you do survey those who specialize in philosophy of religion, the vast majority of them are theists. Rather interesting. So watch how these statistics present a very skewed view just on the surface of things. More to it. They will crush you with the observation that the traditional arguments for God's existence have been refuted. They've been dismissed by serious philosophers. Something I found in my years of studying philosophy formally and then doing my work in apologetics is when they actually bring out their arguments that supposedly refute these classical approaches, I find them remarkably weak. Many philosophers just kind of take on faith almost. Oh yeah, those have been dealt with a long time ago. But when they bring forward the actual presentation, I find them remarkably weak. A very good example of that, by the way, is Bertrand Russell, one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century, famous atheist. Read his treatment of Thomas Aquinas. In my judgment, remarkably uninformed. When he rejects Thomas's treatment of infinite causal series, it betrays a profound misunderstanding of what Thomas is about. This is coming from one of the most famous philosophical atheists of the 20th century, a fortiori in many of Russell's lesser disciples. So I don't find this the least bit persuasive that the philosophical establishment has rejected these arguments. But let's press a little bit further. Looking at these statistics, 86% of philosophers disagree. A lot of this has to do, I think, with academic politics. All you have to do to control a philosophical department is get control of the chairmanship. If you get the chairman of a department who's an atheist, and then perhaps a critical mass of professors in a department who have atheist convictions, in very short order, you can change the whole character of that department. Think of this little coterie now, the chairman and some of his followers, who are in charge of hiring, firing, and tenure. Who gets in the department? Who's given tenure in the department? It's up to this coterie. In very short order, they can change the whole nature of a philosophical department. More to it. Now you've got an atheist group in charge of a philosophy department. Whose papers are accepted? Whose theses are accepted? Whose doctoral proposals are accepted? Well, if you come forward as a young person, hey, I want to write on Thomas Aquinas, I want to write on philosophy of God, well, the faculty might say, well, we're not going to accept that proposal. So before you know it, this atheist philosophy department has now produced a whole successor generation of atheist thinkers who then perpetuate the process. Now, if you find this incredible, I might suggest looking very closely and honestly at the philosophy departments in many Catholic universities. Go back 50, 60 years ago. They were overwhelmingly theist. But look at the philosophy departments of many Catholic universities where you'd expect a prejudice in favor of theism. Many of those departments, if not most, have become largely atheist. Oh, is this because all sorts of great new arguments have come forward against theism? Give me a break. Its academic politics have changed the departments into largely atheist departments. Therefore, are we surprised that 86% of the professional philosophers claim to be atheists? I'm not surprised, given the political reality. Here's a final reflection on this. There's a prejudice in our society, born of our scientism, which, as I've explained, is the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge, a prejudice that says newer is better, newer is truer. Well, is it the case in the sciences? Yeah, I think that's, you could argue. The sciences tend to move upward in a sort of steady, predictable way, where contemporary science is better and truer than what came before. So nobody's going to read Descartes' physics or Ptolemy's astronomy, except out of historical interest. No one's going to go back and read them for the latest insights into science. By the way, my very language there betrayed the problem, as though the latest is always better. It does tend to be true in the sciences. However, it is not true in other areas of knowledge. Take, for example, poetry. Would you say automatically Robert Frost is a better poet than Dante? Or Robert Frost is a better poet than Homer? Well, of course not. Poetry doesn't progress that way, but rather goes through all sorts of ups and downs. Playwrights today, they're necessarily better than Shakespeare. I mean, who would hold that? They don't move upward the same way the scientists do. Philosophy, I would suggest, is much more akin there to literature and poetry than it is to the sciences. Would you say, for example, necessarily, Michel Foucault is a better philosopher than Kant, than Hegel, than Aristotle or Plato? Well, of course not. No one would think that. Because philosophy doesn't move in this steadily upward direction. Now, let's press that even a little bit further. The denizens of philosophy department faculty lounges today who are responding to this survey saying that, most of us are atheists. What does that show? I would say next to nothing. Compare the denizens of philosophy lounges today in 2015 to Jean-Luc Marion, to Ludwig Wittgenstein, to Edmund Husserl, to Alfred North Whitehead, to Jacques Maritain. There's a whole slew of very prominent contemporary philosophers, thoroughly trained in philosophy and completely cognizant of all the developments in modern sciences, who are fierce affirmers of the existence of God. To claim somehow that the responders to this survey in faculty lounges today in philosophy departments have better arguments. They've seen something that these great figures in contemporary philosophy didn't see. Come on, give me a break. I hate the arrogance of a Daniel Dennett that simply wraps himself in the mantle of upright. But I furthermore hate this appeal to statistics to adjudicate the most important question in life, namely the existence of God. I would much prefer that all of us return to argument.